and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving.
Nope.
In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection.
Yes, we do.
I've had a lot of it today.
Okay.
This week, Pastor Rudolph Boshoff joins us to talk about Discernment Ministries, servants or cowboys. My name is Don Vino. I'm
Yeah.
president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is still, and he's trapped in the position,
Yeah.
Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Ron, I already think I know which way this whole program's going because of your usual cowboy attire.
I know. I was going to wear my cowboy attire, actually, my hat and my special gunslinger shirt, but I decided against it.
This is Kippy-IA time, right? Well,
Yippee-yi-yay, yeah.
Well, here we go. Am I going to come on screen or not?
I don't know. I don't see where you are. Oh, I see.
Okay.
There you are.
I'm thinking, I usually see myself at this point. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came outside shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Kippy-yi-yay. The sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Heresy Conservation Board, ensuring sustainable errors for the 21st century and beyond. Our regular legal disclaimer: our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that will be Rudolph Boshoff, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the Webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular notice is the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it, or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now our special guest, Rudolph Boshoff. The audience is going wild.
That's okay.
Okay. So, like I said, greetings. I'm going to stop sharing. There you go. How are you? How are things way down there near the South Pole?
Oh, it's going well. It's going lovely. In South Africa currently, we've got winter, but the winter in South Africa is probably like your summer there by you guys.
It's
quite
just had
nice, warm, tropical. Yeah, so it's quite nice.
Now, I could be completely wrong, and it wouldn't be the first time. And this has nothing to do with the show here, but you're in South Africa, and did you all just recently have, or fairly recently have, an election?
That's correct. We had a recent election, and God was good to South Africa. Let's just say that. I think He worked out everything in a way where a lot of the churches prayed, and we're quite excited to see what's going to happen going forward. So, yeah, God's been good to us.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting. So, yes, we have one coming up too, and we're not talking about it much on air because, frankly, our mission is unrelated to who's president.
Well, we can ask this. I could ask this question. I mean, are things as divisive politically in South Africa as they are here? Where just to even, if we just even mention the names of the candidates here, we could have a free-for-all in our chat column over here. Is it like that there too?
It is. It's obviously politicians and different political parties and different ideologies that are thrown around. But what we've got in South Africa now is the majority party does not have enough votes to rule effectively in a democratic constitution. So they have to find a form of alliance with another party. Now, there's two parties that we did not want to see them form an alliance with. The one is a communist party. For obviously reasons, you never want to form any alliance with a communist party. But the other one is the old president of South Africa that formed a newly found party, and it's equally as bad as the Communist Party, to be honest. So the coalition is between the second best party, or I shouldn't say best, but second biggest party in South Africa, and the present ruling government that have lost quite a few votes, and a few other little parties that have now aligned themselves with these parties to form a coalition government. But for the fist fighting, infighting, the politics surrounding the presidency, I'll say one thing. I think South Africa is pretty unanimous on who should lead. Even though they disagree with the political party, I think the two people that have been appointed, the president and vice president this time around, the vice president is known as a man of character, very outspoken, no track record of any form of abuse or of any form of misconduct. So that's quite refreshing, because I don't know if you noticed, in South Africa, to be a president, one of the qualifications is that you had to be in jail.
Whereas to be governor of Illinois, you have to be ready to be in jail after you get out. Yeah.
Or and I often tell people in Illinois, which is where I currently live, we have a policy that whenever someone runs for governor, they are always running for 2 terms. The one they're elected for, and then they once serve in prison.
Yeah. This kind of seems that way. So, I didn't want to get us sidetracked, but it does kind of spill over into the church over here. And I think it spills over into everything, wouldn't you say, Don? Sometimes doesn't it even get into apologetics?
I think it does spill over, and especially because we have, for example, a group that has among their ranks those who believe that God has giving them direct access to the information about who will be elected, what is God's will in this issue, and like 30 of them were completely wrong last time. So apologetically, they are individuals that we're dealing with on an ongoing basis in the New Apostolic Reformation, and we got to go say, okay, you're being led and deceived by false prophets. I think they are prophets. They're just false prophets. Now, that gets us in trouble because we are viewed as mean-spirited, for example, maybe anti-biblical by those who want to follow false prophets. So here's the question we'll start with. Is apologetics, discernment, part of the biblical, I'll use the word milieu, I don't usually use that, but the culture of the church? Should it include apologetics and those who kind of specialize in apologetics, or not?
Yeah, I can start us off. I can say that the other question should be, should we call out falsehood? That's really what we should look at. And I like, there's a comment by the theologian John Stackhouse. He wrote an article, Why I Criticize in Public. Very well written, and the article is not as harsh as you would think, but he makes the following statement. He says, first of all, we need to understand that I'm a Christian. I'm called to follow the example of Jesus and his apostles. But then also I need to, according to the biblical imperative, show and test the spirits. According to 1 John 4 verse 1, need to make sure that I give an account for who says what and test what they say. And even Jesus speaks and says in Matthew chapter 7, 15 to 16, that we should look at false prophets. And he even tells us in chapter 24 verse 24 of Matthew's gospel that there will be some people that will come with miraculous signs and wonders and miracles. And we need to make sure that we discern and expose. Both those things go together, discern and expose, to warn others about these things. And there's various scriptures that we can go into for this. I think the legitimacy of calling out falsehood is needed in the church. Even I think the late Dr. J. Adams also mentioned that in one of his books, he speaks specifically on correction and judging.
Right.
And he said in 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 2, we love that scripture that says correct and rebuke. He says, but 2 out of the 3 things that we are called to do is in a way negative, right? If we have to correct and rebuke, it means that there is an essential part of the gospel preaching that we should be accountable for what is happening around us and in our communities. Now, that being said, all of us are called to discern. It's not a specific ministry that only has the mandate or the mantle to be discerners and to do apologetics. Apologetics is an added skill, first of all, to the believer. I think 2 Corinthians 10 verse 4 says to refute arguments and lay aside every thought to the obedience of Christ. So all of us have the mandate to be called and to call out falsehood. But in with that, we're living in a modern day and age. And just to give a short story, me and my wife watched a few weeks back, and I suppose the YouTube algorithm picks up a lot of what you view. And I've got a little ministry online. And so whatever I punch in, whatever I look, if I want to discuss a specific topic, I always go and see if somebody else discussed a specific topic first. And I look at cults, but I also look at Islam specifically. And so I will punch in anything on Islam or cults, the specific topic that I look at. And so the algorithm on my YouTube is obviously set towards for me finding all these different discernment ministries. And I was absolutely taken aback by the amount of discernment ministries that are online. And if I say online, obviously YouTube, because I can see a lot of these guys, obviously, the more they post, the more views they get, the more they get a reward for it. Some of them can financially make quite a good living from their discernment ministry. Some of them have quite a hefty following because they've got a specific name or they connected to a specific denomination. But there are certain individuals, unfortunately, that's only there for sectarian reasons. And they love the fight, especially young men that have a lot of time on hand and a lot of skill concerning making videos, let's say, that try to be divisive. And the unfortunate thing is anybody that does not agree with them, anybody that does not conform to what they believe to be the truth, anyone that you associate with that they do not like, all fall in a specific camp of a big target on their back, and they will go after you. They'll make videos. They'll even lie. Sadly, last week I watched a video between three Christians, three brothers that should know better, and the one is accusing the other one of lying about them in a specific ministry setting, and so the other two is going behind or going and making videos about the one. And I'm thinking to myself, what is that? What is the benefit of that in any way or form when it comes to the church, when it comes to the mandate to discern? So, yeah, like I said, obviously we've got the mandate to discern. There's a wonderful article our friend Salvador actually mentioned, an article written by Anton Bosch, where he actually he wrote an article, Physician Heal Yourself, where he looks at the state of discernment, where he looks at who's really proportioned with the responsibility of discernment, and he goes towards the scriptures in Acts 20:28 and 1 Timothy 4:16, where it speaks of the functions of the elders and the teachers. And I agree with that. I do think there are certain discernment ministries like your own that is necessary, that can speak out. But what we want to see, I think, in these ministries, maturity, the heart of Christ, obviously to win the lost and to correct and rebuke and love, but also to see Jesus exemplified in all that they do. And the sad thing is that that is not in the order of the day. What we see in the order of the day is you get a lot of views if you're controversial. I know of a specific individual, they actually wanted me on their channel. I'm not a Calvinist. I love Calvinists, though. I even bring them to South Africa to debate Muslims. But, the interesting thing is that they wanted to do a discussion on definite atonement. And I said, I'm up for it. But after viewing the channel content, I had to decline because it's not really an open discussion. It's more of an invitation into an arena where he can see if he can pull you apart. So you'll speak about the doctrines of grace, and you'll speak about the merit of election. They'll speak about your character and why did you preach in a specific church at a specific time with a specific individual or a specific entity, if you want to say. And I go, who cares? Because they need the truth. As long as somebody opens their church and open up their heart for me to preach, I'll go preach at them, and I'll go and encourage them and make sure that I point out the error and truth in love. But the sad reality is that in a lot of these communities, you find people that are trying to generate heat and not light. And the sad reality is that the outside world is looking into this and they're losing interest.
This is an important aspect. This right at the very beginning. I mean, when I first got involved with this, it seems like 100 years ago now. We were interested in reaching Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what we wanted to do, and it sort of grew from there. And then as we met with other pastors and talked about what we were doing, they were a little concerned that they weren't sure that they even really wanted us in their church, because to them, those engaged in apologetics are high maintenance, is the word that was used. Willow Creek Community Church used that word. They're high maintenance. Well, there's some truth to that. We have red pencil personalities. Now, for those who don't know what that is, when I was but a youth in school, you did your paper, and at the end, the teacher would take it and take a red pencil, and everything was wrong, she would just correct it. Red pencil, red pencil. Well, apologists tend to do that. That doesn't mean it's a wrong thing. It means you may have a bad attitude about the way you do it. And you should be selective about what you're red penciling. So if, for example, you go, I'm not a Calvinist, is that a reason to assault you as not being a true Christian? Or I am a Calvinist, therefore you should be assaulted because you're a heretic. What about you just could be wrong? And it's neither one of those. And we don't have to go to fisticuffs over it. I mean, this is a really important aspect. Our task as those involved in discernment ministry is pretty narrow, really. It is fixating on the essential doctrines of the faith for the purposes of sharing the gospel. There's an end point to this. And then you can add to it perhaps helping believers grow in the faith, but that should be under the watchful eye of the pastors and elders in the church. And this is missing from a lot of apologists, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. And let me just say there are many ways in which you can create unhealthy dissension in a church community. But for the sake of time, there's basically two that usually pops up. The first one is us versus their mentality. Now, it's interesting that in some of these ministries, what we see is that the criticism is never directed to a specific theological position. It's usually, if you look at it at its very heart, or at its very core, it is criticism towards a person. And it's usually based on their personality, their age, their ethnicity, their denominational status, their position in church, or whatever. And we know this is a basic ad hominem reaction, where people are basically criticized purely because they do not fit a specific paradigm. Then the other way to actually create that unhealthy dissension is obviously to demand, like you've just mentioned, Don, it's absolutely spot on, is that theological perfectionism.
Right.
And again, we need to say that there's obviously essentials of the faith that's non-negotiable, like the deity of Christ, the doctrine of the Trinity, God's personhood, the inspiration of Scripture, the virgin birth, and we can go on and on and on. Those things are essential. And by the way, I'll advertise a book of, I think I've mentioned this, of Norman Geisler and Ron Rhodes, Conviction Without Compromise, that lays out quite beautifully which doctrines we can disagree on and which doctrines we need to really hold dear and need to hold in a very special place for our faith's sake. So if you look at that us versus their mentality and theological perfectionism, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of individuals will judge you accordingly, or according to their own preference and what they perceive to be the right person to speak authoritatively on a given topic or subject, and shoot you down because of it. You do not have long hair, so you can't speak to my crowd. You've got short hair, so you can't speak to my crowd. You've got tattoos, so but theological perfectionism is something that is actually another way to drive a wedge in between communities. So in other words, we say to people the following: You're a charismatic, you believe in the gifts. We don't. Therefore, hey, I'm sorry to say, but we cannot fellowship. We cannot come together as a community. We cannot pray
Right.
together as pastors.
Right.
I've had that in a previous church I pastored. Individual came right up to me and said to me, well, you guys, you sing songs a little bit faster than us. And it means probably that we can't pray together. And I went, what? How do you get that? But anyway, so a lot of people will place these demands on us, trying to make sure that we conform to a set of beliefs before we can in any way or form speak authoritatively about a given topic. And again, like I said, there are certain individuals that I disagree with, but I still appreciate their absolute heart for the ministry, heart for the lost, and how they can just absolutely minister to people apologetically, even though I disagree with them on certain peripheral issues. I do not disqualify them.
Right.
I just absolutely make sure that when I speak to them, I do not disqualify them on the basis of trying to call and speak forth and to bring forth a dissension. And I'll just say on that topic as well, Francis Chan recently wrote a book. And there's a few things I disagree with Chan about, but he wrote a book on unity recently, which is actually quite valuable if you read it. And a lot of what he's gone through, I know the guy's been criticized about, because he comes from a very staunch Calvinist background, and now it seems like he's associating with certain individuals that really need correction. And I've got appreciation for certain things and the bravery that he had to engage with certain individuals. And I'm assured behind the scenes, there's definitely, it does not look so sanitized as we would perceive from our side. But I think the heart of unity and the fact that we need to come together and in a spirit of unity, make sure that we responsibly look at certain things is something that comes with the heart of Christ, especially when we speak about errors and when we speak about biblical discernment. That being said, obviously there's two other ways to marginalize or to not attack heresy, and I see a lot of churches that minimalize error. Like, for instance, they'll say, well, there's certain people that I know of, I enjoy them. They do not preach too well, but judge not God's anointed, and there's this almost lethargy to actually to speak out about certain things, which is an error. I'm always reminded of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that said that silence in the face of evil is in itself evil. I like that, because it is in our nature to speak up for truth's sake. And yes, there's a time and a place for everything. And obviously we need to be wise about how we speak, and especially with those people that we have an opportunity to speak with. And we need to do this cordially. And we obviously need to speak quite clearly and say, Lord, give us the wisdom not to be cowards, because some people are just blatant cowards. They don't want to speak about any form of falsehood. They don't want to speak about error in the church, and they don't want to speak specifically about sin.
Right.
Things happen
from time to time, I talk about my home church, because I love my home church. I love my pastor. I have a great deal of respect for him and the elders. And from time to time, we sit down and he'll ask me questions about, okay, we have this issue going on in the church with an individual. Should I take a harder stand on this? And then we talk about, well, what's the issue? And pretty often we go, well, my suggestion might be, number one, it shouldn't be public, because it isn't sin. It's a disagreement over a theological issue. Number two, it may be that it kind of goes against our doctrinal statement of our church. And so perhaps you want to caution them not to teach it in small group settings or something like that. In other words, there's a way to be gracious even when we disagree, as long as it's not heresy.
Yeah. Well, I have some thoughts.
Well, I'd be shocked if you didn't.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure I've thought about them before I say them. I when I think about, did you mention Willow Creek earlier?
I did.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure you did before I mentioned them. But
I did. They
uh,
managed to eventually
it,
get rid
the,
of all of their apologists
right.
because
The
they're
irony here is
personalities.
it's hard to imagine a more theologically weak church than Willow Creek that is somehow managing to stay afloat. It managed to stay afloat for so long on the energy of seeker sensitive, and really the other energy source was just this leadership drive that Hybels had. He leadership, that was his thing, how to lead. Even more than, sometimes I get the impression, even more than any theological thing he had going. So it's really ironic that not ironic. It's here is a theologically weak church telling you guys are apologists, you're high maintenance, and it's like, well, yeah, because at least in certain areas, apologists tend to be pretty theologically strong.
Right.
So if there's a weakness to be found among apologists, I think it's often that they tend to be strong. It just depends on the apologist. It depends on the ministry, but they tend to have a certain bandwidth of strength. And when you get outside that bandwidth, not so much. Now that could be intentional. In other words, they could say, well, we've decided to focus on Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, or whatever, or whatever. But it does, so there are times we need to get outside the bandwidth, and that's when certain apologists show their weakness. And so I would say there is a general theological weakness in the whole church. And I think seeker sensitive churches are just can be at least one manifestation of that, goes beyond them. It preceded them. They didn't invent this theological weakness. And if I were to summarize it, it would be that the church has forgotten how to speak the truth in love.
Yes.
So we have people who are really good at speaking the truth. They're just terrible at love. And there are churches that are really good at being loving and talking about love and talking love, but they're really not so great when it comes to the truth, and supporting it. When I was in a particular denomination that led me to where I came to know the Lord, I wanted to understand more about its troubled history. So I bought a book that covered the history, and one of the chapters was titled Purity versus Unity, I think. And I thought, they nailed it. What is unity? But you could gloss the word love there in place of unity. And of course, purity is the truth, and where this denomination always tended to run off the rails was with this trying to maintain this imbalance. And very often in this particular, especially early in the early years, they went off in the area, they went off the rails on the side of purity and were very unloving to certain people. Now, in our denomination, the denomination that I'm in now, all ministers must, ministers, elders, and deacons, and even I think members, take a vow to maintain the peace and purity of the church. And I think peace is another way of saying love or unity, whereas purity is another way of saying truth. So we have a very hard time, and in our church we actually take vows to this. I'm not sure how clearly everyone understands them, or how clearly everyone understands how difficult it is. But when you talk about people using ad hominems, that's very unloving. It's not only stupid, it's not only a violation of truth, but it's a violation of love at the same time. You're not getting to the truth by attacking someone's personality or connections. So that's my 2.5 cents. I think that's where we have
part
the
of it
problem.
is I think those engaged in apologetics, it's incumbent on them to set the tone of loving discourse with others.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, it is, as you know, I have sort of a stock line because I have people all the time that, you know, call me, label me mean, whatever. And I have a choice at that point. I can engage in an unloving argument, or I could say, you could be right. And I could be short and fat as well. There's a lot of things they can be. I give you my kids' phone numbers and they could say even more bad things. The question really comes down to this: am I wrong? So I want to refocus on the issue, not on the person.
Like, there's a tale of two apologists that sometimes is told. Both of these apologists, in dialogued or debated, depending on what you want to call it, with a notorious liberal from the 1960s named Bishop Pike.
Ah,
And I'll name one of them, but I won't name the other because he's actually still alive. He's the only one of the three who's still alive. And I'd like to think he's learned something from that because it frequently gets brought up that he had a debate with Pike and he pretty much was very shabby toward him, treated him very shabbily as a person. And the other, later on, there was I don't know if it was the same kind of debate or the same format or anything, but Francis Schaeffer had an interaction with him, public, live, and Pike walked away from that actually saying, well, I think this guy actually loves me. He actually cares about me. The other guy, not so much, So obviously we know Schaeffer cared. It seems like he cared about truth above anything.
Right.
But no, he actually also cared about love equally.
Right.
And I think we need to, that's something, Schaeffer has been dragged through the mud in the past 25 years. There are people who love to hate Schaeffer. And yet it's so ironic that he tended to be, there's so many stories I could tell you. People at conferences where he was talking and they would line up to ask him questions afterwards and people would overhear the conversations and they would talk about some personal struggle that they're having, and Schaeffer would say, yeah, I have that problem too.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a very loving thing to say. It's a very vulnerable thing to say. And it's anyways, but you know what? We have a sponsor.
We do, and they're concerned about issues also.
They have their own issues. We all do have our own issues, don't we? And why don't we, these are very serious issues because, the situation is dire. According to the latest research, at the present rate of consumption, our supply of heresies will be completely depleted by 2050. The consequences will be disastrous. If this happens, most cults will close their doors by the end of the century, and most heretical websites will completely disappear from the internet. Not to mention the fact that 75% of what passes as Christian programming will disappear from the airwaves and cable TV. The solution is simple: heresy recycling. Whether you're online, visiting a church, or out at the mall, you can do your part. Always look for the label. The HCJ, I was going to say the call letters of a missionary radio station in Ecuador. No, the HCB label, the Heresy Conservation Board, ensuring sustainable errors for the 21st century and beyond. No, not HCJB in Quito, Ecuador. HCB. Boy, I still have that.
And we don't want to run out of heresy, otherwise we're all out of work. Right?
What do we do? Well, let's recycle those heresies. Because this is a crisis and it's not sustainable. And yeah.
Well,
so
and in truth, though, this is satire. In truth, we are usually always dealing with recycled heresy. It just keeps coming around and around and around again.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as well, many churches are not aware of it until they are infected. I did a thing. We've been doing a Tuesday night thing on deconstruction, and one of the sessions I did, I titled it AIDS, AIDS, and Ron, you're familiar with me using that. And I said, AIDS, the acquired ignorance of the doctrines of Scripture. And Dr. Don Williams is on with me, and he thought about that, and he said, that's actually a really good description of what's happening. It is acquiring false beliefs and false teachings almost intentionally that then infect everything else you believe in your church and in your faith.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the task of those engaged in apologetics? It is, number one, let's try this, to have a good bedside manner.
Mm.
What does that look like to you,
A
Rudolph?
good
How would an
pulpit side.
apologist have
How about a good
bedside manner?
pew side manner? What do you want to?
Okay, whatever. Whatever.
I think
Should the pastor be terrified of the apologist walking down the aisle at the end of a service to have a discussion with them?
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is, the more I get to do with churches, especially in South Africa, there are no apologists in the service to walk down the aisle. They're usually outside of the church. And I think that's one of the concerns is we've got, if I have an ought against a pastor, I make sure to contact the pastor first, right?
Yes.
If he puts out a YouTube clip, if somebody sends me a YouTube clip where they say, listen, this guy said the following, he said XYZ, I make sure to contact the pastor. I send him a letter. I usually tell him, listen, on this date, you said so-and-so to your congregation. And I'm just checking up because, unfortunately, what you said is not true for the following biblical reasons. But I don't want to, you don't know me from a bar of soap. You do not know my influence. You do not know where I come from. My desire is to speak to you in person if I get the opportunity. So please let me know. And we've got a guy that's very well known in South Africa. He's live broadcasted on television, on the public television stations. And he made a statement about, it's not Jesus, that's just the word of God, but we are the word of God. And I went, hold on. And I wrote him this beautiful letter in summation as to what it means when we speak about the monogenes theos and the uniqueness of Christ and him being the word. And I wanted to know, what does he mean when he speaks about this? Because the context of his message did not really get to that. And they took it off network. And he immediately put on his broadcast a little addendum saying, I said this last week, and I just want to say I correct that. I've received, and he sent me a personal letter saying, I'm going to do this. And he did it. And I take my hat off to that ministry for doing so. And he said, when we get together, let's consult, let's talk, which we've done afterwards. And he said, if ever you pick up something that I've said or I've announced publicly, please come to me. Yes, my personal number. Speak to me directly. And the funny thing is he said to me, I just want to say something to you before I took to heart what you said. I found I saw on your website that you're accountable to a few people in your ministry. And I know some of those people. So I personally phoned them first and made sure, who are you? Why would you say such a thing? Where do you come from? And he said to me, the guy that I respect probably the most out of all of these said to me, if Rudolph says something about you, you should probably listen. He doesn't just say something vicariously because he took it in isolation or something like that. It's because he does care. And that was wonderful to see that he did his homework as well. The unfortunate thing is that there was a few ways to blow this. I could have gone in with an arrogant spirit. Could have gone in as a know-it-all. I could have gone in and expect the pastor to do a lot more to cover up what he said. And he didn't. He stayed humble. And I think there's a good cautionary word for us in Paul's words to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22 to 26. And I always heard the first part read because we, in the church I was in, it was a very a Puritan church. And the first part, I could probably mention in my sleep if you wake me up at 12. But in the first part of that scripture, it says, so flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. That's the verse that we usually recite. But then Paul also speaks to Timothy and he says, have nothing to do with foolish and ignorant controversies. And you know what they are, that they breed quarrels. And then he says the following, and here's the instruction for apologists. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness, so that God may perhaps grant these individuals repentance, leading them to a knowledge of truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. Here, Paul gives us a good summation as to what our heart should be and what our attitude should be whenever we encounter somebody saying something that is of no effect. And you guys spoke of Francis Schaeffer. In actual fact, when I became a Christian, one of the first books one of my mentors allowed me to read was The God Who Is There. And I can still remember one of the things that I highlighted in the book, because I was a very zealous Christian. And the first part I read, in actual fact, in the book, very early on in the book, he said, "There's nothing more ugly than orthodoxy without understanding or compromise, or compassion." Sorry.
Compassion.
So orthodoxy without compassion and understanding is something that is deeply dangerous. And the sad reality is you will never bully somebody into the kingdom. I've got an individual that I can listen to him, but he's not for everyone. And he speaks to Muslims. But the attitude in which he speaks to Muslims, if you listen to it, you'll be ashamed. And that's usually what I feel whenever I look at this guy's YouTube channel. The sad reality is he's been through a divorce. The sad reality is that even in the court proceedings, he abused his wife physically. There's mention of that, etc., etc. But the guy's still going. He's still supported. People still support him because he's fun to watch. He dismantles people and he goes, ha, 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 what do you say? And he does all these antics in his channel to draw people. And people think he's a great apologist. And I think to myself,
I hate to say this, but it's kind of like, did he go to the Donald Trump School of Apologetics?
Gee.
I mean, I hate to say it. Something you said earlier I want to mention is that, I know I need a new prescription, but I can still tell the difference between you and a bar of soap. I just want you to know that. But I just checked. Yep, you're not a bar of soap. Okay. But yeah, it's compassion. There's you're mentioning these videos that you can watch now. There's a particular apologist that I won't name again, even though he has passed away. But Don, you mentioned you gave him, I asked you what you thought of him one day, and you said, well, ever since Joy and I gave him a ride from the airport this one time, not too much. And as I'm looking at a lot of what he put online, his videos, man, it's like, yeah, I mean, he's not loving. He is
right.
He is acidic in the way he deals with people that he disagrees with, and even people that he doesn't necessarily need to. I mean, people who might not, he has opinions on issues that are just like intramural debates between Christians, and sometimes he'll just condemn both sides, in these videos with the same kind of just condescension and arrogance, and it's awful. And
yeah, I have had two things in my life when I have met celebrity apologists, let's say. In some cases, I become very, like Norm Geisler, Dr. Norm Geisler, very good friend. But I've had two sort of effects of that. One is I was thrilled to meet them and to get to know them and to develop a long friendship. The second was I am so sad that I met them because they were clearly not the individual on a personal level that they should have been, as Ron had pointed out in this particular individual's case. And that's unfortunate because they are setting a tone for others that are learning apologetics from them. And then they're taking that tone, not just the information, but this attitude back into the church until they end up leaving the church because they're not getting, and this is an important aspect, I think, they're not getting the kind of strokes from the pastoral staff that they believe they deserve.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've seen that on a grassroots at the street level as opposed to at the celebrity level, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Sometimes I've had pastors call me and say, okay, I have an individual here. He wants to do X with our church, but I'm a little concerned. What do you know about him? And as we talk about it, I have to say, my suggestion is this: if he really wants to serve in the church, he needs to demonstrate that he has a servant attitude. And you can't really use him until that happens, because there's too much risk of him injuring others in the body with some of his antics.
You know, the Apostle Paul says knowledge puffs up.
Right.
And I think if I were to have coffee with Paul and talk and bring that verse up, he would probably say, if I were to say, well, does knowledge do that? I mean, should we just like empty our heads of knowledge so that we can all be humble? Because I know if I'm totally ignorant, I should probably also be humble. But then again, I found a lot of ignorant people who have no knowledge who are very puffed up too.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think what he's saying is the same thing runs parallel to what he says about the law. The law is holy, just, and good, but it gives sin the opportunity, and sin takes that opportunity and runs with it. So it tells us not to do something, and it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever watched The Simpsons, that cartoon that we Yankees have over here, where there was this one episode where Bart Simpson, runs into a car. He's on a skateboard, and he runs into a car and bangs his head on the pavement, and you see his little spirit going up into heaven, right? And he gets on this escalator, and it's going up and up and up, and he hears this voice on like a loudspeaker, and it's saying, "Do not run up and down the escalator, and do not spit over the side." And the first thing Bart does is start running up and down the escalator. Then he looks over the side, and he sees the earth getting smaller and smaller, and he goes, and he spits over the side. and at that moment, the escalator turns into a slide, and he goes straight down into the other place. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. That's Romans 7. As soon as we hear the law, it makes us it gives us the idea to do the thing that is in our hearts already to do. And knowledge is the same in that it's not like this toxic substance that brings arrogance. It brings out the arrogance that is in you.
Already there, right?
And I think that's something that goes way beyond apologists. I mean, I've seen it in just theology conferences. I've seen it in online theology videos. You see the attitude coming out in certain people who were given a platform or a microphone a little bit too early in their spiritual life. And yeah.
Yeah, I think recently Dr. Michael Brown actually wrote a very helpful article on Discernment Ministries, and he just says the following. He says, "Listen, before you give somebody an opportunity to grant you their opinion, ask, who is this person? Where did they come from? Is it an 18-year-old kid sitting disgruntled, excommunicated from the church in his parents' basement, speaking from a place of pain and suffering? Is it a former missionary? Who is this person speaking to you?" And then ask yourself, if what he's saying is true, does it fit the overall biblical imperative to speak in the way that is befitting to what we've been taught to do and how to say it? And the sad reality is that a lot of people, and all of us do this. Like I said, if you see something on YouTube that looks a little bit provocative, you click on it and you watch it. It's called clickbait.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of these individuals know, if I get 1,000 people clicking on my channel, or maybe millions, I know for a fact that I will get a view. But without that being too provocative, I will not get the views that I do get. So I need to make sure that whatever I produce, is curtailed in such a way that people will want to click on it amidst all of these other ministries. And I always think to myself, what is the importance here? Is it speaking truth or getting clicks? And let's start looking at people and their heart. Listen, there's a few discernment ministries out there. I love to listen to their stuff because what they speak about makes sense. This is one of those channels. You guys can click and like and subscribe. If they didn't say it, I'll tell you to do it. But also listen to more than one individual on a specific topic and ask yourself,
Right.
Who is speaking to me? Who is this individual? Where did they come from? If you're interested in the way somebody speaks, make sure that you know their theology. There's Mormon apologists as well. There's Roman Catholic apologists as well. And make sure that you understand that the source you're drinking from is a good source. And make sure that the individual that you give your time and your ears to is an individual that is faithful to the Word of God and winsome in all they do. The interesting thing is that we won't watch certain programs on TV, right? We will, when it comes on, with a click of a button, we will just stop it and say, I don't watch this trash. And sometimes you have to do the same, unfortunately, with some of these channels. If you hear and listen to them after 5 minutes, you need to sometimes say, I'm not going to watch this trash.
There's a third aspect that you involved with this, and that is, are they correctable?
Yeah, very excellent point. Excellent point. And how did they handle scrutiny? The unfortunate thing is there's certain individuals. I don't know if you've seen recently Mike Winner's his scrutiny of Benny Hinn. But anyway, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It is quite, for lack of a better word, it's not a fun watch. It's just incredible to see. But anyway, but ask yourself when you listen to these individuals, who are they? Where do they speak from? We've got certain people that like to repeat gossip, and then they call it apologetics. Apologetics is not gossip about an individual,
right?
And it's definitely not giving your opinion about somebody's character. It is you actually making sure that whatever is said is biblical. Secondly, and it's done in the character and attitude of Christ. I don't know if you guys will agree, but I think there's some good ministries out there, and we should listen to what these individuals have to say. But if all we do is listen to apologetics, we're in trouble. We need good sermons. We need to be part of a good church, and we need to mature ourselves as well. And we need to make sure that we're part of a community where we serve in broader things than just apologetics. I've seen a lot of people, and especially young men, they like the fight. So they love apologetics. And then they get involved in apologetics and they do more harm than good. And I always say to people, you can have a good argument. If it's misplaced or done in the wrong attitude, people will still not get it.
Right.
And the sad reality is that we've got a lot of clever people, but we do not have people that have the heart of Christ. And that makes a huge difference.
Right.
And again, like I said, the people that have corrected me and the people that have spoken to me and have actually taught me the most were the individuals that corrected me in a biblical way or in a biblical fashion. And I dearly say thank you to God for those individual people.
Yeah. We have, Midwest Christian Outreach, to be part of Midwest Christian Outreach in a serving way, you have to be part of a local church and accountable to them. Midwest Christian Outreach, in turn, is also a part of evangelical missions to non-Christian religions. And being a member of that means each of us also have to be a member of a local church. So everything we're saying is we want you to be involved in this kind of a ministry, but we want your spiritual life to be observed by those who are close to you, to whom you're accountable. This is really important so that you don't go off the beam. Now, I know we're going to have to go. You advised us in the beginning we have to leave early because you have to actually go teach another group. So, Rudolph, I really thank you for being with us. And if people want to get in touch with you, they can go. We have links on the description panel on where to go find you at, hunt you down, and ask you questions. So,
if I do that now, I'll see you guys.
Ron, would you walk us out of here?
Oh, we're going to end early today. Well, I thought we'd talk a little, but let's not do that. Here, let me get my screen up here. Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Oleg Pulling. Technical assistance comes from Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened.
No.
And with that, thank you, Rudolph. And I know you're going to run off. See you all later.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Lovely night.